My children went to terrible schools. We chose to stay. We left our kids. 2 of my kids had serious reading and learning challenges growing up. They did not learn to read by 3rd grade. They were in terrible. They were in very challenged classrooms. As white kids, they were the minority. 20% of their classmates were from the homeless community, the houseless community. They were really struggling. And every one of those classrooms, we knew every teacher of our boys growing up. And by and large, they were all amazing, wonderful people who were asked to do an impossible job.
Welcome to Jesus in the Upper Left, where we're talking about gospel multiplication in the Pacific Northwest. Joined today by Oshua Hawthorne from Brilliance Labs and Tony Kriz, who you might know as Tony the Beat Poet.
Yeah, if you're in your 50s.
If you're an old timer. It's an old reference.
Kind of an old reference.
A boomer alert right there.
Yeah.
I'm not that old.
Hey, I have a lot of affection for Tony the Beat Poet. He is one of my best friends.
Okay, awesome. Very cool. Well, I mean, a lot of people probably will remember that reference, but some of them won't. And, one of the things we want to do just to start out with is hear a little bit from you and about you, and maybe even something that you're passionately working on right now.
Okay, about myself. I am a lifelong Oregonian. I was born in Newburgh and raised in Eugene. My parents were Oregonians. My grandparents were Oregonians. My great-grandparents were Oregonians. We really have the dirt of this place under our fingernails. Grew up in a pretty secular society. I mean, the Northwest is infamous for being sort of liberal and sort of at least post-Christian when I was growing up, and now it's post-Christian, at least in the urban centers. Went to really liberal schools, but along the way, just had a real profound love for the mission of God in the world. And when I graduated from college, I went to Oregon State University, immediately moved overseas, lived 10 years in some really hard areas of Eastern Europe around war zones and difficult situations, working with a Christian nonprofit doing missions work. And that definitely built my DNA. We were opening new countries, and those experiences came back to the States right at the end of the 90s and have been living here for the last 23 years. I'm husband to Amy. I am father to 3 amazing boys who are now all in their late teens. Over the last 20 years, I've had my hand in, about 70 different projects and streams around faith and culture primarily, and thinking and trying to be a co-participant in a lot of different ways of thinking and different communities. I spent a lot of my life as a translator, going between communities and talking about things. You and I laughed earlier about this whole idea of wanting to get involved in questions that other people aren't willing to ask. And so often we don't even know what question to ask. You have to receive your questions from people who come from a totally different mindset than you do. And you go, oh my gosh, I never thought to ask that question. It's such an important question. Why are we talking about it? And so a lot of those things. And now my work is, I've been basically making my living as a writer for the last 12 years, writing books and films, and right now I'm doing most of my work in the literacy space. We've just completed a feature-length documentary called Sentenced, sentencefilm.com if you want to see something about it. It is not out yet. We are still in the going to festivals. I just got back from New York City, fantastic festival. And this feature-length documentary we want to use to get people to understand the centrality of literacy and how it destroys people, families, communities. It feeds into generational poverty. But my secret hope, please don't tell anybody, but my secret hope is that literacy will be the new issue that local churches take on in a parish mentality to adopt a school, an under-resourced school. As I travel the country, I talk to pastors and talk to parishioners. One of the things I hear over and over again is people say, I want to love my neighbor. I want to love the poor in spirit. I want to love the person who's not like me. I want to love the least of these, but I have no idea how to meet them. It's scary. I don't know how. I don't know what to say. I don't want to put my foot in my mouth. I don't want to make a mistake. Where do they live? And there's nothing scary about a 9-year-old. It doesn't matter their background. There's nothing scary about a 9-year-old. And if you're a parishioner who has spent your whole life being taught.
There's that new movie, Megan. I haven't seen it, but
I haven't seen it.
But
that's
she looks
scary.
pretty scary.
Yeah, she does look scary.
She does look scary. But if you can read a children's book, then you can become the new best friend to a 9-year-old. It only takes an hour a week to go in and help them get up to speed in reading. And if you can read by the 4th grade, the statistics are amazing.
Yeah.
Graduate high school, become a part of society. If you don't read by 4th grade, it's prison and welfare, and it's.
So I heard that in the title, kind of a poetic double entendre of a connection to literacy and incarceration. Is that something that you
incarceration or being sentenced to whatever, poverty, being sentenced to sex trafficking, being sentenced to addiction, being sentenced to being on the outside of this beautiful thing that we call society, culture, being a part of the community of the conversation. And in those places where, quite frankly, churches thrive is when people, it's an old conversation that you can't worry about your soul if you're worried about your stomach.
Yeah.
And so even the idea of introducing the gospel to people, are they even in a position where they have enough psychic energy left over to even think about things like in the afterlife when their worries are all about this life? And so anyway, that's what I'm working on.
This is super cool because this podcast series that we're in is about why context matters. We're in the Portland, Oregon area. Every area is unique, but you're bringing up something, and I'm kind of curious what local spark is connected to this for you. In other words, how do you see this locally affecting people? I mean, is this something that's like for you a very Portland thing, or is this something that's like a very worldwide thing?
Great. So my personal opinion is that churches function their best when they have a geographic theology, a parish mindset. And they take responsibility for their parish. They go, these are the boundaries of our parish, and everything that happens within these boundaries, we take responsibility for. So first of all, theologically, I think that's when churches function the best. And I would say it's most biblical, or there's a strong biblical argument for that. Let me put it that way. For me, I live in North Portland. My children, it's a terrible school district. My children went to terrible schools. We chose to stay. We left our kids. 2 of my kids had serious reading and learning challenges growing up. They did not learn to read by 3rd grade. They were in terrible. They were in very, very challenged classrooms. As white kids, they were the minority. 20% of their classmates were from the homeless community, the houseless community. They were really struggling. And every one of those classrooms, we knew every teacher of our boys growing up. And by and large, they were all amazing, wonderful people who were asked to do an impossible job. Here in Portland, I'm very concerned about that. I would love to see every classroom have 5 to 10 local people who care, retirees, college students, whoever, parents of students, doesn't matter. Come in and just give a little bit of help, because teachers want to teach, but they end up spending 90% of their time doing things other than teaching because their kids walk in tired and hungry and without just the basic emotional stability to just do classroom stuff. So they end up being chaotic, and we witnessed it. And so I really care about it, and I really care about this city. I think Portland's an amazing city, and I want good things for it.
Are you familiar with what Eric Knox is doing with the Hala Charter School and bringing in the mentors into the classroom?
I've known Eric for decades.
Yeah.
And it's really great. It's really great. And those kinds of focus works are really important. And I love those, but I'm really asking questions. My organization, Children's Literacy Project, we're asking questions really about a societal level transformation of the way we think about education and churches, how they think about integration.
Yeah. That's great. Well, are you willing to go down a little bit of memory lane with us?
Sure. Sounds like fun.
So in prep for this...
so we don't know each other, by the way. We are all new friends. So this
with one exception.
With one exception.
Well, what's that exception? Okay. I don't know
so
that counts.
I think it was it had to have been 2006 because I know it was before the iPhone.
Yeah, it was a long time.
Maybe it was 2005. So I had that phone. I had that early smartphone. It was probably the size of a normal iPad now, but it was a phone. And and so I was selling it because I was going to upgrade. It was this HP brick, like with this giant antenna on it. So I put it up for sale on...
Hello, honey?
Yeah.
Hello?
Exactly. And then who called to buy it but Tony Kriz? And so we met at Pete's Coffee in Bridgeport. And I didn't even know how offensive it was to you that you had to travel to the West Side at that point in time. But you did it anyways for love of a phone.
Wow.
Right? And because I was upgrading to some other pre-iPhone thing, I think.
Anyway, so you were saying, sir.
Yeah. So in prep for this chat, I pulled off my shelf my old copy of Blue Like Jazz.
I haven't
opened in years. And I looked at the copyright page and it said 2003. And I felt old all of a sudden because that was 20 years.
Right.
And I was a young Bible college student just getting ready to do church planting. In those days when this big thing called the emerging church was growing and the missional church and the
Those
gospel in our culture network and all these conversations, taking Leslie Newbegin's insights about global missions, applying it to post-Christian, postmodern context and all those things, right? And so you somehow got pulled into some of that where like Don Miller made certain people famous, the cussing pastor and Rick and Imago, and he just made some people famous and made Portland a little famous when it comes to church planting and coming and being a tourist to our little fishbowl of a hipster town. But I wonder, would you be willing, for those that don't know the history, share a little bit of your part in that story, maybe some of the ministry at Reed, and just what that looked like?
This is good. This is good for the theme of what you guys, this conversation you're trying to have. So I'd been living in Eastern Europe. I lived in Albania and I lived in Macedonia and then Hungary. Macedonia during the Kosovo War. So I was 15 miles from the Kosovo border during the Kosovo War. I've been evacuated. I've been involved in 2 evacuations by the State Department because of terrorism. So very intense 10 years living around the world in some hot spots. And burnout, came back really in bad shape, did not leave the mission field well. Mission field or international work by church people and Jesus people. And at the end, I was in bad shape. I was burnout and I become sort of the worst version of myself, truth be told. Angry and manipulative. And so I came back to the States, ended up in Multnomah, and was going to seminary. That was really my sentence.
What years were those?
That would have been 99 to 2002. I got my MDiv. And the organization, the nonprofit I was working with, the Christian nonprofit I was working with, they're like, you're in bad shape, so we're going to send you to seminary because there's nothing there's nothing like a good slow drip of theology to heal your soul. And so I sat in class and grumbled and asked really, really inappropriate questions over and over again. And at that point, I met a girl, and she was involved in a prayer group thinking about starting a church. And that prayer group became Imago Dei. So we came into Imago Dei when it was just a circle of a dozen people praying about the possibility of doing something. So we were right there at the beginning. And I know Rick was on with you guys before. And so we were with Rick all through those first 8-10 years. But in the meantime, I get no credit for this. I got a phone call from a friend of a friend of a friend from Southern Oregon, from this fundamentalist church, who was like, there's this poor boy in our church who's a brand new Christian, and he's at Reed College, and I'm sure his soul is being poisoned. Would you go? I've heard that you're not afraid. Would you go and befriend this poor boy at Reed College? So I was like, sure, I'll go. And so I got the phone number and I called this kid at his dorm. And we were like, well, every Monday afternoon, how about if I just come buy a cup of coffee and I'll just be your new friend? That was it. That was the extent of my passion for Reed. I didn't want to hang out at Reed at that point. Reed was a place where, they told ghost stories about Reed around Portland. It was a place where they would send, going on safari, they would send groups of suburban church people to go wander around and pray over it, because it was this scary place.
Don't they run around naked and stuff?
And absolutely they do run around naked. And yes, drugs run amok, and there's a lot of experimentation in every area of life. And its slogan, it was atheism, communism, free love. And, so I don't want, I had heard the ghost stories. I'm not looking, I've already been to the scary, I'd already been in war zones. I don't need to go to this place, but I'm hanging out with Mitch, and Mitch and I just become friends. And without going into everything, there was a guy who'd been there as minister for 10 years, just a rock star, just faithful. And he had a ministry of 3 students that he was caring for. After 10 years, just a rock star. And Mitch got involved with those guys. So now it's 4. And he, for personal reasons, he had to leave campus. He asked me if I would take over. There was another organization that was in charge of this person. This is too much details, but I basically had to submit to this other organization, say, yeah, because he said, I want you to come on campus and care for this little group of students. Would you do it? There's no one else who's willing to do it. And I'm like, well, I'm willing. And so I went and became a cooperative friend with God, a cooperative friend with these students. And one thing led to another. I met a guy named Donald Miller along the way. Donald was really struggling with his faith. I said, well, why don't you come and we'll work out our faith together with these beautiful, brilliant kids. When we got there, it was I'd been doing ministry for years. I'd opened countries and I knew the rules. I had all the 3-ring binders on my shelf, but I looked around Reed and I'm like, one thing about, I lived in the Muslim world. I lived in Albania, lived with a Muslim family for 2 years. You got to read your space. And none of those 3-ring binders had anything helpful to say about Reed College. It was this place where they did all collaborative learning, where everyone was considered as cooperating in their own education and their own enlightenment. You can't come in and do this hierarchical crap. You can't come in and bring out a program, or let's go through this booklet, or even let's read this book. This holy book, so we came in and I just looked at these students, a small group of students. I said, you guys are in charge. You tell me. And this was 4 people who were followers of Jesus. You tell me, what do students want? Do they want to talk to the divine? Should we do a talk to the divine circle? Do they want to read sacred texts? Should we do a Bible study? And they're like, no, people want to wrestle with ideas. So I'm like, great. What does that look like? Let's do an idea group. And so Thursday nights, we did an idea group. And the idea group was just a gathering where people came. It started out being 5 of us. Pretty soon it was 30, then it was 40. And we would just introduce an idea a question that would be so common to the Christian conversation, but to this room, they wanted to talk about it. Questions like, why are we so effed up? Why are we so effed up? The basic question of sin. The first one was, are we? Are we all?
Yeah.
Are we all effed up? very foundational question. And that was the terminology we used with, the full term. What does it mean to be saved? Or what does it mean to be whole? Mm-hmm. What does it mean to wake up spiritually? What does that look like? What does it mean? Cooperative conversation. And in the end, there would be like a 4-minute homily from some ancient mystic, like trying to explain that particular idea. But it wasn't to say the answer. It was to go, to sum up our conversation, here's a paragraph from this mystic with a few ideas just to wrap it up. And then everyone felt like they were part of the conversation. We would do conversations with the divine meetings, but they weren't Christians that showed up. We had Wiccans and Jews and stuff show up, and it was great because we would all sit around, and when I would pray to Jesus, but they might pray to something else, and we would have this and they're experiencing it, and I'm inviting Jesus and the Holy Spirit into the room as they're asking enlightenment to whoever, the sky fairy, the creator, whoever they're talking to, they're asking for enlightenment, and simultaneously the Holy Spirit is being audibly invited into the presence of what's going on. We did mission trips that half the mission trip was non-Christians. And, we were just trying, and these were all ideas that came from the students. And eventually when it came to Ren Fair, do you want me to tell?
Yeah. Talk about the confessional, right? Is that?
Yeah. So at the end of every year, after that first year, our first full year there on campus and all these things had happened and the group had grown a little bit, Ren Fair was coming in. And at the end of the school year, there's this thing called Renaissance Fair where everybody celebrates completing their thesis. Because every Reed student, undergrads, they have to write a thesis in order to graduate. And it's a notorious multi-day event with lots of nudity. There's the bug eating contest, and there's naked rituals, and then there's the water fire battle when they build like a giant ship in the front lawn, and they you try and take the ship, and lots of experimentation. Back then, there were medical tents specifically just to help people come down if they needed to. And the school would hire security to keep people out, basically. This was my understanding. It's been 20 years. So if I get the details wrong, my Reed friends, I apologize. But we were asking, so the Renaissance Fair, what would it mean for us to participate in this thing? And we threw around 100 really bad ideas, and we landed on, well, what if we built a confession booth? And it was funny. At first it was we're all laughing. A confession booth, that's the most hysterical idea. That's totally a Renaissance idea. Walk into a confession booth, sit down, say confess your sins. Reedies will think that's hysterical. We'll build a freestanding confession booth in the middle of the lawn, right off from where the big ship had been built that was going to be firebombed. We're just right there in between a couple of trees, between two ferns, between a couple of trees. And, the idea is we're going to build this confession booth, and I would sit on one side, or Don would sit on one side, and then people would come in. And originally we were like, we'll ask them to confess their sins. That'll be hysterical, and who knows what'll come of it. And then one day we were talking about it. I said, what we should really do is we should actually confess. That seems a lot more like a Jesus idea. So my wife sewed these burlap monk outfits, with the rope around the waist and the big burlap hood, and wore that and went in on the priest side and just sat and waited, and people would come in, and I'd sit down and go, "Hey, welcome to the confession booth. And here we confessions are heard. If it's okay with you, I'd like to begin." I'm a lifelong Christian, and the Christian church has a lot to ask forgiveness for, and and that's my family. The church is my family. It's my spiritual family. So I would like to ask your forgiveness. Would you please forgive us for the Crusades, the Inquisition? Would you forgive us for the contributions we've made to racism and slavery in this country and around the world? Would you forgive us for the ways that we hate every day, and how we put some groups in the corner, and how we talk about things, and then the terrible language you use? Would you please forgive us? And we would just list off. And would you please forgive me right now? And they would look and they go, "No, I'm serious. Would you please forgive me? Would you please forgive me for all these things?" And inevitably the person would say something like, That is the most effing beautiful thing I've ever heard in my entire life. And then they would go, of course I forgive you. And I'd be like, thank you so much. Thank you for coming to the confession booth and hearing my confession. And then every time they would go, my dad used to beat me. And I'm really struggling with heroin and I don't know what to do. I feel like my parents hate me and I don't know where to go. You know, it would just pour. It would just gush out of them. 20 minutes, 30 minutes, just blah. They get to the end and get a chance to say a blessing over them and just go, these are my thoughts. They'd walk out and, you know, we had guards outside because they were burning everything down. And so we wanted to make sure that nobody was torching the plywood box I was sitting inside of. But there was no line to get in, but somebody would walk out. And as soon as they would walk out, someone would just stumble by and they would just go, and they would just walk in. And there was never more than 90 seconds between one person and the next person. Sometimes they'd come in as twos and they would scrunch in there. It was only the size of a phone booth, you know, and we'd sit and we'd have the conversation. And that just felt like a really great application of the space we were in. Mm-hmm. And eventually, this mother organization that had been historically responsible for Reed's spirituality, they didn't like the ways that we were doing spirituality, that they felt like we were unbiblical, heretical. And I mean, I'm an old school Christian, man. I'm a gospel loving, Bible thumping Trinitarian. And to have an organization I've respected my entire life go, you're bad because you dared, and we didn't do everything great. I'm sure we made mistakes, you know, but where's the space to make mistakes in this thing called the church and in this work of church planting or ministry planting in our context? Where's the space for risk and the daring? And it's so hard to be a pastor because your job is hanging by a thread all the time. You say the wrong thing from the pulpit and you might pay for it for 3 months. It's so hard. We're so cruel. And so, you know, and so pastors, they hide all their pathologies. They have to hide them. You know, you can't tell everybody all the stuff that I'm into because I know what happens when you admit that you got struggles. Anyway, it's just hard, you know, to take risks and.
Yeah. And when you go to the frontiers of mission, where you're on the place where the church gospel culture overlaps, and it is kind of a no man's land where the church doesn't feel comfortable there.
Right.
I don't know. What's the reverse confessional today? So 20 years later, you're observing the church, you're in the church in Portland, you see what we're trying. We were just talking earlier today about all of the division over politics and race and gender and pandemics and what's that reverse confessional today that's both difficult for established churches to kind of maybe be at peace with, but which you see the unbelieving culture responding to and being open to?
That's a great question. I mean, some of it's just tried and true stuff. It's been true forever. We're terrible to LGBTQ community, parts of us. And I think one thing, and this, you know, as I travel around, everywhere I go, I say the church is my family. This is I have some crazy cousins and some crazy uncles, but they're still my family. And even though I've maybe never said it, I still have to take a certain level of responsibility that my family is out there propagating some really, really, really painful stuff. So I mean, there are issues like immigration where the church has a huge place to play that we're not. I honestly think, let me put it this way. so much of my healing over the last 15 years has come because I've tried to enter into submissive relationship to non-whites. African Americans and Native Americans specifically. And to really try and submit myself to their leadership and say, you have authority over my life and the choices that I'm making. I think it's really essential to my racist soul and my racial family that I need to heal from and take responsibility for, and that I take advantage of all the time, those privileges, passively and actively. At our church, we pray the confession every Sunday morning. Forgive me for the things I've done and the things I've left undone. And then there's this line at the church I go to: forgive me for the evil I've done and for the evil that's been done on my behalf. I love that line. And as a straight, white, middle-class male in the richest generation in human history, there's a lot of evil that's done on my behalf and that I benefit from. So I think there's a lot of places we could go with it. Now, if you want to get into the theater of what would be the theatrical confession booth of today, that would be a great brainstorm to get together with a group of people. But I'll tell you, it took us like 3 weeks to come up with the first idea, so I'm not sure we're going to come up with it right now. We had to throw a lot of bad ideas out the window.
Yeah.
I want to push on something you said earlier when you were describing the way you circled up with the Reed students. I think that I love the Reed example because obviously it harkens back to Blue Like Jazz, where a lot of people probably remember that if you've read the book. But I think that the Reed example, you still see so many expressions of the exact same thing. It's not like that has changed, maybe different issues, maybe slightly, nuanced, but the reality is that there are people asking those questions, and by and large, the church kind of has operated as though that didn't exist. And so there weren't any forms so you try something, you get smacked down for it. But it seemed to me like you use the word friends, and I know you use the word friendship. Like, how do you see that being a solution or an answer to the issues of kind of this bifurcation of church and culture?
Yeah, being cooperative friends with our neighbors. Are you talking specifically about sort of the ways we worked things out at Reed and
that? But how do you apply that now, like in our now culture?
Yeah, well, I think we need to flatten the organizational structures within religious organizations. One of the things we would do at Reed, which I think you could do in any neighborhood, is if we had, decision-making is still decision-making. You still have to have committees, to just kind of, we're going to go to San Francisco and we're going to hang out with houseless people for spring break. Let's all do that together. I've got contacts down there and get us housing. Let's figure out how to do it and what we want to accomplish. Well, the how to do it, it was who wanted to be on that committee. And it didn't have to be Christians. It didn't have to be the proven leaders or the ones that had been called and baptized as leaders, in this group. It's like, no, who cares about this thing? Come, give your creative and spiritual energy to this thing we want to do. And, the whole thing about Christians should have authority, once you've checked off these 5 books, these 5 things, you now get authority to do something, to lead worship, to lead a Bible study, to preach, You have to have some group of boxes checked off. And yet we all know 10 years down the road, we're going to find out that person gave up on their faith, they're apostate, they, whatever. It happens all the time. So even when we check the boxes, a third of the time it's a total failure. So, just to limit people's voice within a context, I think but I actually don't really believe in the clergy personally. I believe in the clergy as vocation. Mm-hmm. And I do believe it is a gifting, but I don't believe in the clergy as being like having magical
like
powers
or something like
that
that
everyone else doesn't have. Because
Sure.
someone's clergy, therefore they have the supernatural power to stand on stage and talk about important ideas. Really? Like, because somebody's clergy, they have the supernatural power to make bread and wine a new metaphor that they're not just bread and wine anymore in whatever theology people have. Like, really? Like, I just don't buy it. Like, now I love vocation. I love the fact that some people go, I want to give my life to doing all the stuff that it just takes logistically to keep this thing running. Because it takes a lot of work to keep this thing running, whatever it is. So I'm a huge fan of that. And I pray for and I weep for pastors and all that they have to carry. So please, everybody hear that from me. But I just like, let's make space for people. And I quite frankly think churches probably should be smaller, and I think they should be parish-based. I think they should be geographically rooted. It's very hard. Two things, there are many things. There's two things that are very hard when people drive to church. One is when you climb in a helicopter called a car and you fly to your church, and when you land on the way there, you have the opportunity to change your clothes, change your personality, put on your Facebook self, and to walk through the doors. And those people will only see you there and only see you in curated environments. And that is really safe. If I live, work, play, drink, recreate in the same neighborhood, the people I go to church with will see me as I fully am. And I'm not able to live in this helicopter life where I change clothes, I change personalities in between the different places I go to. And I know no one's surprised with that statement. We all know the people that we all put on our best face often in the foyer of the church. That happens. Second thing that happens is I think it's almost impossible to live an integrated life with your neighbor as a community, if you're not living and loving in the same space. Living, loving, and worshiping all in the same space. And you actually have the opportunity to see what the real needs are of your immediate space, to get involved together, to see what actually people are, where are their hopes, unfulfilled hopes that we could be a part of and we could participate in. And you can't see those ways that we get to participate in the really beautiful things that we can do together. Mm-hmm. Like I'm working in literacy now. One of the things I love about literacy is it's so cooperative. It's so non-hierarchical. It's me going, hi, teacher, I'm going to come for an hour a week and I'm just going to sit and do whatever you tell me to do. Non-Christian neighbor teacher, I'm just going to sit here and you can just boss me around. Tell me which kid to spend time with and I'll spend time with that kid. I got no vote. You tell me how to do it. You tell me which books you want me to read. I'm just going to sit here and I'm just going to serve you and this child. It's beautiful. And I just think it's so Jesus-like. So those are a few thoughts.
That's killer, man. I love the expressions that you're using and the living and loving and worshiping in the same space. That's a great vision. Thanks for sharing that.
Sure.
Yeah. So we can go a couple routes. You mentioned in passing about non-majority culture people, also your time overseas. And so Portland is a pretty white city, like just.
Oh, you think?
Demographically, but at the same time, like, so I'm in a very diverse zip code neighborhood. I'd be curious what you what counsel or what words would you have for the majority culture church regarding new Portlanders, our refugee, immigrant, kind of non-majority culture neighbors? And then also related to that, how would you speak to the new church planners coming in who perhaps are attracted to white urban hipster culture and are entirely missing that there's a whole nother element of Portland life that doesn't get put on TV shows and like broadcast out to the rest of the country?
Challenging. So there's a handful of pieces. As far as churches are concerned, there's no way. It is extremely difficult to ask a church to truly love its neighbors if they don't live, love, and worship in the same in the same neighborhood. It's just really hard to know. And the marginalized and those people who have no voice, particularly immigrants, they are really good at hiding. They disappear into backwater apartment complexes you didn't even know were there at a dead end of a street. And unless you are literally walking the streets and entrusting one another to spy out the land, you're never going to know where those folks are that would love to be a part of a local church. Oh my gosh. To come in, and then if you say, we want you to be a part of this thing, and you don't have to convert, just come be with us, sing with us. Like, and don't flinch when they say they're Muslim or Buddhist or whatever they happen to be. Don't flinch and go, that's great. We want you to be a part of our family. Would you please? We want your kids to be part of our kids, you know? So that's on that. We could do an entire episode on Portland's racial history. I don't know how much you want to get into. Portland's racial history is terrible. We are perceived as this really enlightened liberal city across the country. In reality, we have been horrendous to the African-American community in particular, but that's not the only one. So there are very few ways to actually integrate with African-Americans in Portland because there are so few, because they tend to get pushed out to communities that most people never go to. And because talking about white Portland power structures, have so kicked the African-American community in the private regions over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, and then go, hey, why don't you want to be friends? Why don't you want to be friends? Come on. We're all loving Jesus people, aren't we? Let's be friends. And when they step back and go, you're not my friend. And we can get into the specifics of it, but it's very, very challenging. So for me, the answer to it was to actually go and submit myself to a community of African Americans. I mean, that was the answer, to go in as the epitome of privileged culture, educated, and go, I'm submitting to this space, and I will speak when I'm asked to speak, and I will not speak otherwise. And you are, for some of them, I refer to them as uncles, some I refer to them as pastor, but always with terms of honor. And for 15 years, I've been trying to live that way. My wife and I also opened our home and made it a communal home. So we lived with African Americans and Mexican Americans and houseless people off the streets and people coming out of recovery under and shared the roof. And that was language we tried to use. We're sharing our roof with you. We're sharing our roof together. This is our collective roof. And tried to, as much as possible, people are coming from a lot of different hard situations, but share meals together and actually be in life together and those kinds of things. But the conversion process is not, you can't fill out a response card and think you're converted to these things. It takes work to change. There's so much entropy. There's so much velocity to the ways that we have lived that we have to do some serious work in order to put on some brakes and to change the way that we live and behave and think as families and as communities and as neighborhoods. And another thing I love about parish is when you're a parish church, then everybody inside your parish is in your church. They don't have to come to Sunday morning. They don't have to be on your membership roll. You can go whether or not you want to be, you're in our parish. We've just decided we're with you and you're with us. We're going to be in this thing together. I also love that because then suddenly I go, oh, I have to submit to this place because these are my people. So.
Can you share more about where and how you submitted yourself to, an African-American leadership structure?
So at the time I bought that phone from you,
yeah,
right around that time, actually, I was a wreck. Being shamed off of Reed campus put me into a spiral. It did. It's like, I'm done. Like, lived in the Muslim world, lived in Yugoslavia during the war. Like, I've done my time, God. Like, went to Reed. I really tried to submit. I really just I just hung it out there. I'm like, God. And I just felt like I was like the best version of myself. It's like, God, this is what you made me for. And then to have Christians come in and go, it's like, crap. So me and actually a Reed student, a graduate student that had graduated, he and I started a little business, we called it an economic justice company. And we had all these ideas about these things we were going to do in the city. And he's not a Christian. And so we were going to really get involved in neighborhood development and all this kind of stuff. And of course we were horrible at it. He's blue sky guy, brilliant, genius, blue sky. And, I'm just not that smart in the area of economics. and we were empty refrigerator failing. Empty refrigerator failing. And I was in trouble. I was in so much trouble. And we just had a baby and we were pregnant with another one. I'm like, oh my gosh. And I ended up having lunch with this guy from Beaverton. You guys will be happy to know. I got set up on a blind date with this guy who's a businessman. And we got set up because he hated the emergent church and he wanted to basically tell me all the ways that I was wrong because I was this sort of infamous emergent church guy. So I sat and he would just ask me these trick questions where he was just trying to, trap me. I kept answering the questions in ways that were unexpected. And he thought it was going to be a 15-minute coffee and ended up being an hour-long lunch hanging out together. And at the end of it, he said, you're surprising. You're a surprising guy. You should meet some friends of mine, the white guy. You should meet some friends of mine. Show up at this address next Friday morning. That's 7 a.m. Like, why? He goes, just trust me. So I showed up and what I found was I was sitting in a circle of primarily African-American men where I was not only the 15th largest personality, meaning there were at least 14 people with larger personalities than me that doesn't happen very often. But I was also about the 15th largest person in the room. There were guys in there who were 6'10", 6'5", 6'8", 300 pounds. I mean, boom. African-Americans, Native Americans, and a couple Hispanic guys, and an Asian guy, and then a smattering of white guys. And I went and I sat there and I watched people do spiritual formation like a gladiator stadium. No rules, no constraints. If you have to put your hands on somebody, you put your hands on somebody. It scared me and it inspired me. And I said, I'm in. And I showed up every Friday morning at 7 for 3.5 hours. And I didn't talk for the first 2 years that I went. I just sat and took it. And we do surgery without anesthesia. That's what we call it. And that group had already been going for almost 20 years when I joined it. And I've been going for almost 20 years now. So that's how it happened. It was magic. And I'll tell you this though, right around that same time, we had started to live communally. And we were doing it as these enlightened, justice-oriented, emergent Christians. And we had just bought our first house and we had a couple extra bedrooms. I'm like, we're going to have people live with us. And we had about
neo-monastic.
We weren't quite neo, we hadn't gotten there yet. Don't worry. We ended up getting there eventually. But so we opened our doors to people and we had about 10 or 12 people show up and live in our house with us. And it was great. And we were really excited. We're like, we're doing the work. This is all after Reed, this is really great. And one day my wife and I are sitting at the table and we're talking. Like, who else come through here? And we're like listing off all the names of all these really great, beautiful people. Some had gone on to be pastors and done these different things. And we got to the end And my wife and I looked at each other and we realized every single person that had lived in our house, we had an open door policy. Whoever shows up can live here. They were white, middle class, educated, Christian, church going, they were us. And my wife and I looked at each other and we go, we claim to be like enlightened justice people, and we can't attract anyone who literally doesn't look exactly like us, shop like us, vote like us, read like us, worship like us. We couldn't attract anybody. And we got on our knees and we're like, God, help us. We are broken. We were living out Prescott, out near 5 Points, like really tough neighborhood. And we could not attract anybody who literally wasn't just like us. And we're like, God, you have to help us. You have to help us. And within a few months, I had that luncheon with this guy. And then we ended up buying a different house in North Portland. And that house has a red door. And a red door is a historical symbol of this is a place of refuge. And suddenly our door people started to come to our door who weren't like us. It just happened to us. And a lot of it was because we begged God for help. And we're so broken that we can't do it. We're flawed. We're psychologically and spiritually flawed on a level. And so God had to do it. I can remember this one day. I'm in my house and there's a knock at the door. It's like, honey, get the door. All right, got it. Go down. I opened up our front door, the red door, and standing on our front porch, like blocking out the sun, is this 300-pound Mexican-American man, 20 years old, standing on my front porch. And I'm like, hi, what's going on? He's like, hey, can I stay here? I was like, what? He goes, yeah, I heard you speak once down in Texas, and I've been hitching my way across the country, and I like you. So I'm here to stay in your house. And he moved in for 3 years.
Oh, wow. That was the application process right there.
That was it.
Yeah.
Came in, we're like, wow. It was that much, had nothing to do with us. So it's not easy, man. Whoever asked it, I can't remember.
So can I share a short story of
I've been
a
talking
very similar experience? So when we bought our house in outer Southeast Portland, I had never met a single Muslim my entire life. Where I grew up in Hawaii. There wasn't Muslims there, and or I didn't find them, they didn't find me, and we moved to Portland, and again we think it's this white city, and then we see all these kids walking by going to David Douglas High School, and there's a ton of diversity, all these Africans and Burmese and Afghani, and we go through the first Ramadan in our neighborhood, and there's like all these apartment complexes, and it's so clear they're celebrating this month. And so for the first time, we start praying for the Muslims in our community. And I go for a run one night, and I see these two Arabic-looking guys out smoking cigarettes right across the street from us. We start chatting, and it turns out they're from they're English students from the Arab world, from a Muslim country, and they're like, "Oh, come over for dinner. We want to feed you. We want to meet." And I'm like, "No, you come to my place. No, you come over." And so eventually we get over to their house. We share a wonderful meal. My wife and kids go back across the street, go home to bed. I'm there till like 3 or 4 a.m. in the morning, drinking Pepsi and talking and eventually gets around to them saying, "Hey, we have this homestay here, but we really don't like this house. We really want to live with some Christians. We want a Christian family to live with." And I thought that was really surprising. Like, wow, really? These Muslim guys, these like conservative Sunni Muslims want to live with Christians. Okay, well, and then I full on do one of the Good Samaritan things where I'm thinking, oh, I know Christians that might host you, that might have room in their house. I know some people. I tell them, okay, I'll talk to people at my church, and I'll see who be willing to host 2 young Arab men in their home, right? And then I get home that night, and I'm talking to my wife, and I said, "It's the weirdest thing. They want to live with a Christian family." And she's like, yeah, interesting. She's like, we have room.
Oh.
And we just bought this new house, and we have this big finished basement that I unpacked all of my books. I could finally lay out my theological
man
library.
cave.
And I got a man cave in my office where I'm gonna do all my important pastoral things, and packed up all my books. And I moved my office to the furnace room, and Mohammed and Abdullah moved into our basement.
Nice.
And that began the crash course in being literally family members, adopting in a way Muslim sons. And they live with us, and then they moved out, and then the friend moved in. And then he moved out, and then the cousin moved in.
Nice.
And then he moved out, and the other friend moved in. And it was just, that was the journey of exactly like what you said. When you take that step and you just say, okay, Lord, our home and our life is open. He brings you.
Yeah,
people.
but if it hadn't been for the fact that you were living on the street outside your house on your block, that probably never would have happened. I mean, getting out from front of our screens, living in our neighborhood, walk every evening, greet your neighbors, intentionally walk a different path every evening as you get out. Make sure that every coffee shop, you're going into, try and learn the names of, people who work in the shops around your house or whatever. Like, be a part of your neighborhood, and those opportunities, they will come up.
Another thing we just discovered: get a dog.
Get a dog.
So I've been on this have kids kind of track for the last
that got expensive,
16
right?
years. I have a handful of them, and then we stopped having kids, and it's like, okay, well, now we got a dog, and you take that dog to the dog park. An hour of nonstop conversations.
Instant friendship.
Wow, people love their dogs. What an open door to Portlanders.
That's awesome. I mean, what I hear you saying, and Ashwa, you sharing as well, is I think because both of you sort of have missionary experience, right? In different parts of the world. And it seems like because my next question for you, you've already answered. It was going to be if God like tapped you on the shoulder, Tony, and said, you're going to plant a new church in Portland tomorrow. My question was going to be, what would you do and what would you not do? And I think you've already answered all that stuff, but it's these practical, it's that missionary mindset. I love the parish thing. So powerful, so simple, but just like none of what you shared is rocket science, right? But it's not tangible, practical love. And I think for those that are watching and maybe desiring to learn more about what kinds of things they should be, or how they ought to approach ministry in the upper left, this stuff is incredibly relevant.
Yeah.
For the record, we don't live communally anymore. I don't want to pretend to be something that I'm not. When our kids got to a certain developmental age, we couldn't be slammed into 2 bedrooms. So we had to downshift, and who knows what the future holds, but I don't want to pretend like I'm not something I'm not.
Yeah, well, I think you've well established a track record.
There's definitely different stages in life.
Yeah,
Same thing
stages.
with us. As we have teenage daughters, as our family's grown, we're not able to do it right now anymore. But it shapes you when you're willing to do that.
I mean, just watching you even tear up, as you're talking about your experiences with human beings that were searching for something. We can really see your heart for the city and for the people, and we appreciate it. Hope it rubs off on all of us.
Hey, Tony, for people that want to follow up with you and your projects and what you're doing, how can they learn more?
Boy, I'm easy. I have a weird last name. So Kriz. So TonyKriz. So at Tony Kriz anywhere. I'm easy to track down. My books are available everywhere on Amazon, and if people want to check those out. So yeah, I'm easy to find.
Okay.
And sentencefilm.com if you want to learn about this new film that we just made.
Okay. Thanks.
Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of Jesus in the Upper Left. We want to ask you a quick favor. Would you please subscribe so you don't miss a single episode, and share with those that are in your life that might benefit from the content. Hit the notifications button, rate and review, of course, and then head on over to upperleftshow.com where you can find bonus content, opportunities to connect with those around the city that are doing similar work as you, resources to help you, and just a way to connect to the community. We hope to see you again next time.